Here, man. It got a little crazy out there, but we made it through.
We're gonna keep stacking the day, so see you in the championship.
Bow! Let's go!
Championship bound, baby. June 17th wasn't just another win, it was a statement. A full circle moment forged in fire, frustration, and memory. Because if you think this game was only about the scoreboard, you missed the storm brewing beneath it. Let's rewind to May 30th. That night, the Indiana Fever stepped onto the court against the Connecticut Sun expecting a battle. But what they got was a war. The Sun didn't just play tough, they played dirty. Sophie Cunningham took a hit that had no place in a basketball game. Moments later, Sydney Colson hit the floor too, the victim of another reckless, borderline violent play, and at the center of it all, JC Sheldon. She was everywhere, dishing out contact, bumping bodies, pushing limits, and somehow escaping every whistle. The referees silent, like they were watching a completely different game. The result, an 85-83 loss for the Fever and two injured players, key veterans whose presence would be sorely missed in the games that followed. But more than the pain, more than the loss, something else stuck with Indiana: the disrespect. Fast forward to June 17th, same opponent, same energy, but this time, Indiana was ready, and they remembered everything from the opening tip. The tension was thick. You could see it in every screen, every loose ball, every stare. The crowd could feel it. The bench could feel it. The Sun were about to pay. Then it happened. JC Sheldon, once again pushing boundaries, poked Caitlin Clark right in the eye during a heated moment. It didn't look accidental. It looked like part of a pattern. And in that instant, the temperature of the game changed. Clark stepped back, blinking through the sting, but the damage was already done. Something snapped, not in Clark, but in her team. And that's when Sophie Cunningham reminded everyone why you don't mess with Indiana like a freight train, running on adrenaline and memory. She closed in on Sheldon and delivered the kind of flagrant foul that wasn't just physical. It was emotional retribution. The crowd exploded, the bench roared. It wasn't just a foul. It was a message: you don't come for Caitlin, not anymore, not without consequences. For the Fever, this wasn't about revenge, it was about justice, about standing up for your teammates when no one else does, about drawing a line in the hardwood and saying, not today. Indiana went on to win that game, but the scoreboard wasn't what people were talking about. It was the fire, the loyalty, the payback. So now, here we are, championship bound. Not just because we played well, but because we never backed down. We remembered, we responded. We rose. If you ride with Indiana, if you felt the heat from May and watched the redemption of June, drop a CC and spicy Sophie in the comments, because this team isn't just playing for a trophy, they're playing for each other. Let's go.
Was chippy the last time these two teams faced off too. Sophie Cunningham suffered her ankle injury in that game, but in addition to that, she actually had part of her front tooth knocked out. She made contact with JC Sheldon as Caitlin Clark knocks down the triple.
But what people don't talk about enough is how hard you have to work to be able to be that good. All the hours that she's spent perfecting her craft.
Retreating, firing, and hitting.
So she can do that.
On Indiana arguing the call.
I mean, step back, you're late. She almost looked.
Picture this, May 30th, Indiana Fever versus Connecticut Sun on the surface. It was supposed to be just another regular season game. To WNBA teams fighting for playoff positioning, another night. Another matchup, nothing out of the ordinary. Or so we thought. The arena was buzzing. Fans filed in expecting a showdown between elite talent and tough defense. The opening moments felt familiar: jump ball, set plays, fast breaks. But beneath that surface normality, something felt off. From the first whistle, the Connecticut Sun made their intentions clear. They weren't there just to win, they were there to dominate by any means necessary. What unfolded over the next 4 quarters wasn't just basketball. It was a collision course with chaos. The Sun came out swinging, not figuratively. Literally, their physicality didn't just toe the line, it obliterated it. It was hit after hit. Shove after shove, arms flailed, bodies flew, and through it all, the whistles stayed quiet. You could feel the mood shift, not just on the court, but in the stands, on the broadcast, and in the eyes of every Fever player watching their teammates hit the hardwood again and again. It started to feel like the refs weren't just letting them play, they were letting things slide. The Fever tried to adjust, tried to match intensity with intensity. But how do you compete when the rules aren't being enforced? When your opponents are playing a different game entirely? One where fouls don't exist and justice never shows up. Then the hits turned personal. Sophie Cunningham went down first. It looked like a deliberate shot, the kind that gets replayed on highlight reels with question marks and slow motion. She hit the floor hard, wincing, clutching her side. The ref said nothing. Then Sydney Colson, another questionable collision. Another no call, another veteran writhing in pain. On the floor while the game marched on, at the center of both, JC Sheldon, relentless, physical, and somehow untouched by the officials. No warnings, no texts, no accountability. By the second quarter, it was no longer a game. It was a message, one sent loud and clear by Connecticut: we can do what we want. The Fever? They were bleeding, literally and figuratively. Their bench was thin, their stars were shaken. The scoreboard was tight, 85-83 by the end, but the loss wasn't just 2 points, it was trust. It was bodies. It was control of the game slipping away, not because of talent or execution, but because nobody stepped in to protect them. The league watched, the officials watched, and they let it happen. But Indiana didn't forget. They remembered every hit, every stare, every time the whistle stayed silent. They remembered watching Sophie and Sydney get helped off the court instead of celebrated on it. They remembered the look in Clark's eyes when she saw her teammates go down while the game went on. Like nothing happened, that memory didn't fade, it festered. And what Connecticut didn't realize was that in choosing to play dirty that night, they wrote a check and Indiana was going to cash it.
Talk about the physicality for a second. 2 players on the Indiana Fever got injured last night by the same player on the Connecticut Sun, and that was JC Sheldon. And I tweeted about it. She was playing so reckless. I'm fine with players playing aggressive, but there is a thin line between playing aggressive and playing reckless. When you dive for a ball, you don't land on somebody's leg. She landed on top of Sydney Colson's leg, and her leg got stuck and literally twisted around. Both injuries, both Sydney Colson and Sophie Cunningham, were contact.
Sophie Cunningham went down first. Hard dot. It wasn't just a rough screen or a clumsy foul, no. This hit felt deliberate, the kind of contact that makes you sit up straight, rewind the footage, and say, wait, was that intentional? It was too much for a play that should have been routine, and Sophie knew it. So did the crowd, so did the bench, but before anyone could even process what happened, it got worse. Sydney Colson went down next, caught in another suspicious tangle that had fans, players, and even broadcasters asking the same thing: what's actually happening out there? To Fever players injured in one game.
They weren't non-contact. They weren't ACLs, they weren't Achilles, they were contact injuries caused by the same player. And this kind of physicality that the WNBA they brag about. They say it's always been a physical league. That's just the heart of the It's not good basketball. And we've seen so many injuries. Paige Becker's out with a concussion. Rakia Jackson was out with a concussion. All of these injuries are contact plays. We've seen Caitlin Clark last year get chucked to the ground. We saw Angel Reese get clothesline chucked to the ground. The players continue to do it because the refs are allowing them. Why wouldn't you keep doing it if you're a physical player?
Here's where things get really interesting, because this didn't start in the WNBA. This rivalry has roots, deep ones. Back in college, it was Iowa versus Ohio State. Caitlin Clark versus JC Sheldon, to powerhouse programs, to fierce competitors. But this wasn't just a battle for Big Ten supremacy. It was a grudge match that kept building every time they met. From the moment they first shared the floor, Sheldon made it personal. She wasn't just trying to slow Clark down, she was trying to get inside her head. She shadowed her every move like a second jersey on screens. She bumped her hard, not by accident. Off the ball, she chirped constantly, tossing barbs and trash talk during stoppages and dead balls, always poking at Clark's intensity. Game after game, the tension grew. Clark would torch defenses with deep threes and wild assists. But Sheldon kept coming. Her goal wasn't just to win, it was to rattle Clark, to frustrate her, to wear her down mentally and physically. And now here they were again. Different league, same energy, same heat, only this time, it wasn't college anymore. The stakes were higher, the spotlight brighter, the hits harder. But Sheldon hadn't changed. She was still playing that same calculated game, still trying to pull the same strings. The only difference? Indiana had Clark's back now, and they weren't letting the past repeat itself without a fight.
Her mortal enemy took out a player. JC Sheldon. Caitlin Clark's mortal enemy. JC Sheldon.
May 30th was more than a loss. It was a failure of control, of safety, of accountability. From the opening quarter, it felt like the referees were watching an entirely different game than everyone else in the arena. As the intensity escalated, so did the contact, but the whistles stayed silent. Hard fouls were shrugged off like routine bumps. Dangerous plays were ignored outright. It was as if the officials had decided early on to let chaos rule, no matter the consequences. And the consequences were brutal, time after time. Caitlin Clark watched her teammates take punishing hits. Sophie Cunningham absorbed a blow that looked more like a hit in a football game than anything that belonged on a basketball court. Then it was Sydney Colson. dropped in another reckless collision that made fans and teammates alike gasp each time. The officials stood motionless, no flagrant, no technical, no warning, and through it all, JC Sheldon walked away untouched, not just physically but by the rulebook. She was at the center of it, playing with an edge that had long since crossed into dangerous territory, and yet, the officials never intervened, not once. The frustration on Indiana's side was impossible to miss. Every possession felt like a boiling point. Clark, known for her composure even in the fiercest moments, was visibly emotional. The Fever didn't just have to battle the sun that night. They had to battle the silence of the whistle too. They fought until the final buzzer, gritty, determined, wounded, but they came up short, 85-83. A 2-point loss in the box score, but a far greater loss on the court because they didn't just drop a game. They lost two essential pieces of their roster, Sophie Cunningham and Sydney Colson, both sidelined by injuries that could have been prevented if the game had been officiated the way it should have been. If someone had stepped in when the line between competition and recklessness was clearly crossed, their absence would echo in every game that followed. A reminder of the night the refs swallowed their whistles and Indiana paid the price.